McCormick. Turning to you, Mr. Oz. Except for your time attending medical school and graduate school, you have not actually lived in the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania. So how do you respond to concerns that you do not know what is best for Pennsylvanians? You have 60 seconds, sir.
Well, Pennsylvanians that I speak to are quite clear. They care much more about what I stand for than where I'm from. But I did grow up less than 10 miles from Kennett Square, where my father learned a lot about mushrooms. He was an immigrant, recruited to this country as a doctor, and he would always tell me, don't be a mushroom when you grow up. And to make sure I did not sit in the dark all day long, get fed manure, and then get canned at the end of it all, I went to medical school at Penn, business school at Wharton, and then the biggest and most important decision of my life, I met and married my wife, Lisa. We actually live in the house we were married in.
All right, thank you, Mr. Oz. Ms. Barnett, you have lived in Pennsylvania since you were quite young, and we know that Pennsylvania voters value their deep roots here, but you're not polling higher. What do you feel you have to do in order to improve your poll numbers? You have 60 seconds.
Actually, in the last poll, in the Travolcker poll, I am essentially at a three-way statistical tie for first place. And that is as a direct result of the people here in Pennsylvania because they want one of their own. You know, I don't make many promises on the campaign trail, but I can promise the people of Pennsylvania that when these carpetbaggers lose, you will never see them again. And if they should win, you will never see them again. And I think we've gone through two of the worst years of our lives during the pandemic and on. And I believe people are very concerned about making sure that our voices are represented. They want someone who doesn't just parachute into our state because it's an opportune time for them to do so. And then if they should win, then they leave and we have no voice. This seat is too important to just throw away our voice like that.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Barnett. Turning to you, Mr. Bartos, in that Trafalgar poll that Ms. Barnett referenced, you are running in the back of the pack of the 5 candidates on the stage tonight. You recently expressed some frustration that you've been campaigning for years while some of your political opponents only recently got into the race. Mr. Bartos, how do you explain why you are trailing in the polls? You have 60 seconds.
Well, I'm a lifelong Pennsylvanian. Proudly raised in Berks County, married a Pennsylvania girl, grew up in Allentown. We've raised our 2 girls in the state. And I think there's a key difference. The reason 40% of the Republican electorate right now remains undecided is because they're trying to figure out who do they trust. Who do they trust to actually do what they say they're going to do? And you're going to hear this a lot tonight. There's a lot of words from a lot of the candidates. I am the only candidate running who has a proven track record of actually getting things done for the people of Pennsylvania. When the Democrats shut us down, when Tom Wolf and John Fetterman shut us down the last 2 years, I rolled up my sleeves, I gathered a great group of leaders, we raised $3.5 million and helped over 1,000 women and men across all 67 counties keep the lights on in their small businesses, saving thousands of jobs for working families. Pennsylvanians know I will always fight for them because I always have. I always will because I always have. That's the key differentiator in this race. A lot of words from the other candidates. I'm a doer, I'm a fighter. I'm going to win this race because Pennsylvanians know they trust me to go down there and fight for them.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Bartos. Ms. Sands, you grew up in Cumberland County, in fact, not very far away from where you're standing right now, but you spent most of your time outside of the Commonwealth. So same question, why does it appear that you perhaps are not connecting with Pennsylvania voters? 60 seconds to respond.
Well, I am connecting with Pennsylvania voters. I am an 8th generation Pennsylvanian, so my family's been in Pennsylvania longer than anyone else in this race. And as a matter of fact, my first real job was at Hershey Park. And I live close to my elderly parents and my sister and brother. There's only one person on this stage that has spent more time in Pennsylvania than me, and that's Jeff, because I've spent about half my life here. I worked as a 3rd generation doctor of chiropractic with my father in Camp Hill. And then I went to Denmark and served as the U.S. ambassador to Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. So I voted and paid taxes in Pennsylvania even when I was serving abroad on behalf of all Pennsylvanians and all Americans as well, working to counter Russia and China with the Department of Defense and NATO, working to increase jobs here at home because I actually increased our trade with my great team over 43% while I was there. So there's no one else in this race who's more Pennsylvanian than I am.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sands. Dennis.
Well, we've all seen them, therefore we can't ignore them. We need to follow up here about the attack ads that have been flooding TVs, phones, and mailboxes across Pennsylvania. An unprecedented amount of money, tens of millions of dollars so far, has been spent, much of it on negative advertising directed at Mr. McCormick and Mr. Oz. Mr. Oz, we're going to start this question with you. I don't know if you've heard, sir, but you've been called a Hollywood liberal and a rhino, Republican in name only. What do you say to the critics who are saying that? You have 30 seconds.
These are ads primarily run by one of my opponents, Mr. McCormick, and they are designed to try to fool the electorate. Mr. McCormick approached President Trump with these types of information, was unable to pull the wool over his eyes. President Trump saw right through him. He therefore did not endorse Mr. McCormick. He endorsed me. And out of that, and another slew of these ads has arisen, once again trying to tell Pennsylvanians something that President Trump does not believe is true, and I can state categorically is not true.
Okay, Mr. McCormick, an attack ad claims that you made billions of dollars for China and millions for yourself as a hedge fund manager. In 30 seconds, what is your response to that criticism?
Listen, I've been a successful businessman. I've run 2 businesses. I served in our military for 10 years fighting against the communists. I negotiated at the highest levels against the Chinese and other countries when I had a top secret clearance at the National Security Council. And I've done business around the world in 20 countries, including 2% of our business in China. And it's just disingenuous for Mehmet to say that when Mehmet has so many dollars coming in his pocket from China, which we can talk about, that it's sort of mind-boggling. And we can talk more about the negative ads because the negative ads in my case.
Okay, Mr. Oz, I want to flip back to you really quickly. You've also been accused of flip-flopping on key conservative issues like abortion since you've been running for Senate. You've said you support overturning Roe versus Wade. Should there be exceptions for rape, incest, or the life of the mother? 30 seconds.
President Trump endorsed me quite clearly in the first point he made about why I'm a conservative, America First Republican. He said that I am pro-life, and I am pro-life. I've been very clear on my position throughout this race. There isn't, to my knowledge, evidence that I'm not pro-life. In fact, in crowded groups, I've been always out there saying that I'm pro-life, even if everyone else in the group is pro-choice. And I've been able to proudly proclaim as a heart surgeon who's taking care of little babies 4 or 5 days old. I met one recently, actually, that has now grown up to become a teenager. But saving those children's lives when they're that young is reflective of how small they are in the womb.
Should there be an exception?
There should be an exception for the life of the mother. We don't want mothers dying as they try to give birth to a child.
Mr. McCormick, also with you, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, should there be exceptions for rape, incest, or the life of the mother? And we will hear from everybody on this. You have 30 seconds, sir.
Well, I want to say Mehmet has flip-flopped on every major issue, and you can go to his own comments. May 21st, 2019, an interview at the Breakfast Club. He essentially said that he was worried about the pro-life movement that was creating fights. He was worried about states putting in place pro-life legislation, and he called into question when life begins at conception. So it's just not true. It's in his own words, which are all these things are in his own words, and he's flip-flopped on every single one of them.
How about you? Exceptions in your view?
I believe in the very rare instances there should be exceptions for life of the mother.
Okay, I want to move to Ms. Barnett. You have 30 seconds. You have spoken passionately about the issue of abortion while on the campaign trail. You're very much pro-life. Should there be any exceptions in your view? You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, actually, I actually should get a minute because you've asked them 2 questions and you're just now getting to me. But a high name ID, which is really one of the only reasons why Mehmet Oz received that endorsement, works both ways. His name ID is so high that people know he's not a conservative. Hence the reason why I'm the only one in that last poll who shot up and got the benefit out of that particular endorsement. MAGA does not belong to President Trump. MAGA, although he coined the word, MAGA is actually, it belongs to the people. Our values never shifted to President Trump's values. It was President Trump who shifted and aligned with our values.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bartos, you too are pro-life. Should there be exceptions, or do you support an entire ban of abortion? 30 seconds.
Well, wait, before we get to that, your viewers at home should play a drinking game every time these candidates talk about themselves, because this election has to be about the voters. It has to be about you, the voters, not about us. They've made this about themselves. They've spent $60 million fighting with each other. And people pat themselves on the back and bang their chest about how wonderful they are. This election is about fighting for the people of Pennsylvania, making Pennsylvania what she can be. We can't have this. We have to beat the Democrats in November. That's why. Where have these guys been for the last 7, 10 years fighting for conservative principles?
Let me just ask you, though, quickly, should there be exceptions when it comes to abortion?
Yes, I believe in exceptions.
Okay, let's turn to Ms. Sands. You're also proudly pro-life. Should there be exceptions, or should abortion be banned across the board? You have 30 seconds.
I am pro-life at the beginning of life and at the end of life. But I do want to comment on 2 of my opponents. Oz says he's pro-life, but as a matter of fact, he's not just not pro-life, and we've just tweeted out his own words that he is not pro-life, but also he's Turkey first. He served in the Turkish military, not the U.S. military, and he chose to do that. He chose to put Turkey first, and he has said that the baby's heartbeat is not a heartbeat, it's an electrical impulse. We know that's what a heartbeat is. And Dave McCormick, he is China first.
Okay.
He made his fortune in China, and he is China first.
Ms. Sands, thank you very much. I do want to give Mr. Oz a moment, 15 seconds to respond.
President Trump was very clear, I'm America first. I was obliged to serve for 2 months
Maybe he
in the
didn't know.
infirmary in the Turkish military, which I did in order to be able to visit my parents as I went through my life. I can love my mother, and I can love my country as well.
Thank you. Lisa.
All right, moving on, we want to talk about the economy and American jobs. First question to Ms. Barnett. The pandemic exposed weaknesses in the supply chain that have contributed to inflation and product shortages. Outsourcing, some companies have said that this is profitable, but we have seen firsthand how this could be risky in a crisis. Ms. Barnett, how would you bring back high-paying American jobs and address the supply chain shortages? Please
Yeah.
be specific, 60 seconds.
Yes, much of what we are experiencing, if not almost all of it, is as a direct result of the failed policies of the Democrat Party. But here's the rub. Democrats can change absolutely everything tomorrow if they wanted to. They would just have to admit that every single thing they've ever done and said has been a complete and utter failure. And what are the odds of them doing that? So when you're looking at what they've done, it's not COVID that stopped the supply chain. The reason why the supply chain is the way it is right now, we have 20% of the 9,000 shipping containers sitting outside of ports. And instead of Pete Buttigieg doing what was necessary in order to get the goods and services off those ships and onto the shelves and grocery stores, he went and took maternity leave instead of being able to drill and dig and put the resources, the energy resources into being able to drill and get it out to not just Americans, but also to the rest of the world. Democrats have decided to weaponize climate change and to create a war against energy. So
All right, thank you.
Democrats can change it
Thank you,
if they
Ms. Barnett.
choose to.
All right, turning to you, Mr. Bartos, how would you bring jobs back to America? How would you also address the supply chain shortages? Please be specific, 60 seconds.
Sure. I'm running to save Main Street, Pennsylvania. That's the whole campaign. It's been focused on all 67 counties' main streets. The number one way to do it is to unleash Pennsylvania's energy industry. We are sitting on 2 Saudi Arabia's worth of natural gas. We can power the nation and we can power our allies around the world with Pennsylvania resources. And natural gas is a much cleaner alternative to the coal plants that are being fired up all around the world. These greenies in Europe and around the country, they're making coal happen. Pennsylvania is not only the key to keeping Vladimir Putin in check and holding him in check and stopping his war of aggression, but it is the key to bringing good-paying, working family jobs back here to Pennsylvania. Now, I'm running to save Main Street, Pennsylvania. The 2 out-of-staters, the 2 tourists who've moved here to run, they don't know Main Street, Pennsylvania. They haven't cared to spend time there until they decided to run for office. You can't save Main Street, Pennsylvania if you cannot find Main Street, Pennsylvania. From day one, my campaign has been focused on all of you, your families, and what's best for this place I've lived in my whole life and live with every fiber of my being. As a United States Senator, I'll be in Washington fighting for pipelines, getting our gas to market.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bartos. Turning to you, Ms. Sands, in 60 seconds, how would you bring back high-paying American jobs and how would you address the supply chain shortages? 60 seconds.
Thank you. It is so important that we bring back those jobs. We saw under the Trump economy that we had record levels of employment for women, minorities, the least educated, and he was beginning to bring back those manufacturing jobs, lowering regulations and making us competitive with the rest of the world with our tax structure. We have to hold the line and support the low regulations. I will work to do that in Washington. We're going to onshore those jobs. The supply chain in much of the cases right now is in trouble because China is locking down their cities like Shanghai, and we have to make things here. So I say we bring those jobs back, we onshore the jobs, and we do it here in Pennsylvania. We can make steel here, we can make the pharmaceuticals, we can certainly explore for more energy. I called for Operation Warp Speed for Pennsylvania Energy, that we drill, we harvest, we lay the pipes, and we send it around our country, and we send some, we sell it to our allies and partners in Europe, so they don't need Russian energy.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sands. Mr. McCormick, turning to you, how would you deal with the supply chain issues and how would you bring back American jobs?
Well, listen, first, just back to the last question. I'm not going to be out Pennsylvanian or out America first by anybody on this stage. I've spent more of my life in Pennsylvania than you and Mehmet for sure.
Not
Jeff,
true.
not you. I've gone to the military to fight for America, America first. No one else can say that. And then I've created 600 jobs here in Pennsylvania in my company. None of you can say that. So I put my track record with Pennsylvania and America up against anyone here. Jeff's right. It's the energy sector is key to unlocking our economy. It's key to creating jobs here in Pennsylvania. And this is what we should be talking about as candidates on this stage. We have to unlock energy. And this is where Mehmet's got a real problem. Because in his own words, he said as recently as October 13th, 2014, that we should have a ban on fracking in Pennsylvania. His picture, his signature, his article. And so these are the issues we need to cover. That's not an unfair thing to say. That's a reasonable question for you if you're going to represent Pennsylvania in the U.S. Senate, where fracking is the key to our energy future.
All right, turning to you, Mr. Oz now. Your turn to respond on what needs to be done to bring back jobs and address supply chain issues.
Dishonest Dave is at it again. He went groveling to President Trump with, again, these types of allegations. President Trump saw right through them, did not endorse them, and then he endorsed me because, as he said in his announcement, which he wrote himself, I know exactly how to manage our energy issues and deal with many of the other factors that we as a nation have to be strong and bold on. Let me speak to the specific answer. As a professor, a scientist, and someone who understands a little bit about the actual energy infrastructure, there is no way the Green New Deal is going to provide us what the Democrats promised. It's a lie. It's a false narrative like so much of what they said about COVID. And so if you look at the architects of the Green New Deal, you'll realize that that's why they're shutting down our ability to harvest natural gas from under our feet here in Pennsylvania. Natural gas that could power the entire country for 200 years. They will provide well-paying jobs here in Pennsylvania. And I'll give you a stat. If we take our natural gas and ship it overseas to replace what they're currently using, it will be the equivalent of electrifying every vehicle in America, plus a solar panel on every one of your roofs, plus doubling wind energy, all together every year for 30 years.
All right.
That's progress.
All right, thank you, Mr. Oz. Turning to you, Mr. McCormick, for a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, listen, the reason Mehmet keeps talking about President Trump's endorsement is because he can't run on his own positions and his own records. And what's true is that he has flip-flopped on every major issue we're talking about in this campaign. He's never, in his entire media career, advanced a conservative agenda. They're all liberal points, liberal agenda that he put forward, and now he's flip-flopping. And the problem, Doctor, is there's no miracle cure for flip-flopping, and Pennsylvanians are seeing right through your phoniness, and that's what you're dealing with, and that's why you're not taking off in the polls.
All right, we got to stay with the economy for a quick follow-up. This is for everyone, so we get everyone weighing in here. Ms. Barnett, we're going to turn back to you. You have all blamed President Biden for inflation. What is one economic decision the Biden administration has made that you would vote to reverse? Ms. Barnett, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Yes, thank you so much. Listen, for the overwhelming majority of Americans, we've been out here doing the right things. We've been working, we've been paying our bills, we've been sending our kids off to school, we've been trying to put something to the side. And right now, and that has generally been the vehicle towards achieving the American dream. But right now, the American people, for those who are those Americans who are 90% below the top 10% of Americans versus the bottom 90% of Americans, they have been suffering through wage stagnation for the past 2 decades, and it is as a direct result of the Federal Reserve being weaponized to push all of these trillion-dollar bills.
Mr. Bardo, same question. What is one economic decision the Biden administration has made that you would vote to reverse?
Well, for your viewers who took my advice and played the drinking game about them talking about each other, they're already drunk. But on the American Rescue Plan was a disaster. Everywhere we go, and I'd say all of us, because we're all traveling around the state, everywhere we go, from Susquehanna County to Washington County, from Erie to Delaware County, we can't find employees. Employers cannot find employees. When people are not working, nothing works. People can't go to school. Everything breaks down. Our economy will not get back on track until people start working, and the Biden administration paid people to stay home.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bartos. Turning to you, Ms. Sands, you have 30 seconds. One economic decision President Biden made that you would change.
Right. Well, it's the out-of-control spending. I'll stop it the day I arrive in Washington, because we're going to bring more America First senators than just myself. And we will stop the out-of-control spending, and it's going to bring down the inflation. The Green New Deal garbage, corruption that's stuffed into these multi-trillion-dollar bills are hurting our working families, our seniors on a fixed income. I will bring down the price at the pump for them. I will bring down that inflation and give them some relief. Carla Sands is going to bring down the price at the pump. I promise them.
All right, thank you. Mr. McCormick, same question. What is an economic decision that you would reverse? You have 30 seconds.
There's three things we could do to win back the war on inflation. The first thing we need to do is unlock our energy sector. That was a terrible decision. That's driving the price of fuel. That's driving inflation. The second thing we need to do is put pro-growth economic policies in place that ultimately grow our economy and deregulate. And the third thing we need to do is cut back dramatically on this spending. Republicans, Democrats alike over the decades have not been prudent on spending, but what's happened over the last 18 months under Joe Biden is unprecedented in American history. We've got to pull back on the spending. Those are the drivers of inflation. As a job creator, I know what to do.
All right, thank you, Mr. McCormick. Mr. Oz, what is an economic decision the Biden administration has made that you would like to see changed? 30 seconds, sir.
The only thing Joe Biden is building back better is the Republican Party. And it's pretty clear to all of us right here, they were getting a tremendous boost from the inadequacies of his leadership. The number one thing I would do is reverse an executive order passed January 27th, right after he was inaugurated in 2021, which stopped drilling on federal lands. 1/3 of all the energy in this country is under those federal lands. Those lands are ours. We own those lands, all of us together. They should be lands that we can drill on. It'll provide us energy independence, actually energy dominance, make it easier for us to help our allies overseas.
All right, thank you. Dennis.
Well, the phrase America First has become a rallying cry for the Republican Party. All of you, to some degree, many tonight, have embraced it. And on the campaign trail, Mr. Bartos, we're going to begin with you. Do you consider yourself an America Firster? And in 60 seconds, can you tell us exactly what that means?
President Trump won Pennsylvania in 2016 because for the first time in generations, millions of our fellow Pennsylvanians felt listened to. They had felt ignored for generations, and someone was finally listening to them and fighting for them. And that means energy jobs. It means all of the main streets that I've had the privilege to travel around the last 5 years in all 67 counties, meeting working families, meeting farmers, meeting the people out there fighting in our healthcare systems to make sure we stay well, fighting to make sure our energy gets to market. They had someone in the White House fighting for them. And so President Trump's policies, remember, just 3 short years ago, we had the best economy in our lifetimes. All of our lifetimes. I'm looking around the room here. We're all young enough to say our lifetimes. Unemployment at the absolute low for every group that's measured. People were working. The economy was growing. And for the people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder, building their way up, their wages were increasing at the highest. So to me, America First means policies that put working families on a path to growing and climbing that ladder, parents being empowered to make the decisions right for themselves and their children, and safe and secure communities.
Thank you. We're going to turn to Ms. Sands. Same question. Define what America First means to you and how it would guide your work as a senator. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. So everyone here on this debate stage is talking about being America First. They're all saying it. I actually did it. I'm the only person in this race that was appointed by President Trump to be his ambassador to Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands that actually worked in the administration, putting America First policies forward every single day. Also, Kathy, to my left, says she's America First, but she actually lost her last election by 20 points in a red wave year. And she says America First, but she can't actually close the deal. She lost by 20 points, and it was not stolen by 20 points. We need someone who can win this election. I'm a reliable conservative voice that will always vote conservative and America First in Washington. You can count on me. They did not steal that election by 20 points. She lost her last election to a weak Democrat. John Fetterman is not a weak Democrat. He's strong. I will beat John Fetterman in the fall.
Thank you. I am going to give you 30 seconds to respond, Ms.
Thank you so much for that, because are you saying that there was absolutely, that the 2020 election was above par, that there was no fraud, that there was no issues with that?
Not 20 points.
Are you telling me that it was perfect? And because apparently that's what she's saying, so for all of us in the Republican Party, now we have a candidate on stage, Carla Sand, who is saying that there was absolutely nothing to see in that 2020 election. But beyond that, you say that you are America First, and you did so much for President Trump, and yet he rejected you twice.
Thank you, Ms. Barnett.
And did not give you that endorsement.
Ms. Sands, I'm going to give you 15 seconds quickly to respond to that.
President Trump doesn't always get the best advice. It's unfortunate but true.
But you did so much to help
I
him.
am the only conservative voice
No, you're not.
that every Pennsylvania voter can count on to always put America and Pennsylvania first.
Thank
I
you.
actually did it. Everyone else talks about it.
Thank you both very much. Speaking of America First, let's go back to you, Mr. McCormick, the original question in 60 seconds. How do you define America First?
Well, in a nutshell, I think what President Trump did is he put his finger on the fact that there were many millions of Americans and many millions of Pennsylvanians that were left behind, and that the policies and the leadership didn't take care of them. And I was reminded of this. This crystallized for me about a month into the campaign in Carbon County, and I walked into a diner, and a woman came up to me, and she told me that she wanted to tell me about her son, Michael. And Michael had volunteered for the military after 9/11, had gone to Afghanistan, had been in a terrible combat situation, and came home and was really struggling, and then sadly killed himself. And she said, when you get to Washington, I want you to watch out for Michael. Watch out for the Michaels of the world. And she handed me this gold star. And that's what this is about. That's what America First is about. It's about taking care of the Michaels across Pennsylvania who've been left behind by trade deals or by technology changes or by 20 years of war that hurt a part of our population disproportionately. They haven't been represented, they haven't been led, and that's what America First is to me.
Thank you. Turning to Mr. Oz. Former President Trump endorsed you. He coined that phrase, America First, in 60 seconds. How do you define it exactly?
One word: respect. What President Trump did was respect people who had been othered, forgotten, canceled, people who were waiting in line for their turn, and they kept getting pushed out of the way by the federal government pretending to help. And the reality is, when you respect people, they gravitate towards you. That's why President Trump has done so well. And by respecting people, specifically that manifests by educating their kids, and that includes, by the way, protecting them from indoctrination when they're 5, 6, 7 years of age. But it also means putting them through high school so they learn a trade, they're able to go out and actually make a living, and they're in a position where they can go out and become what conservatives need to do, which is to populate the country with people who think about conservative values as they make their lifelong decisions. Conservatism lives because we respect each other. We have to respect the working class population. They have been pushed to the side, and we can do better.
Okay, Ms. Barnett, we're going to turn to you. In 60 seconds, what does America First mean to you?
Yeah. You know, a few moments ago, Mehmet said that MAGA means respect. No, MAGA means freedom. And if you're a conservative Republican, you know that. Yes, President Trump coined the word MAGA, but the word itself, Make America Great Again, belongs to the people. What does it mean? It means the freedom to live my life the way I choose to live my life, and not to have anyone's foot placed on my throat, telling me what I can and cannot do, forcing me to take a jab when I may or may not want to take a jab, forcing me to do things or to teach my children certain curriculum that I don't want to do. That is what the word means. So although it was coined by President Trump, it certainly belongs to the people of this great nation, and we need to be very mindful of that. And I want the people who are watching, be very mindful and be very clear. It doesn't take much for someone to learn our talking points as conservative Republicans and then come back on stage and parrot them to us. Look at how people have lived their lives prior to the opportunity to actually run for this seat.
Thank you very much. We do have a follow-up for everyone, beginning with Mr. Bartos. Former President Donald Trump continues to talk about the 2020 election. Is it time for the Republican Party to move forward? Mr. Bartos, 30 seconds.
Well, unfortunately, Joe Biden's the president. And as a result of his lack of leadership, we have chaos in Russia, the illegal war, the aggression against Ukraine. We have chaos in the Middle East. We have an ascend in Iran. We have an ascend in China. We have an economy in disarray. We have runaway inflation. And this is on the heels of every Democrat running. Every Democrat running this year is going to have to answer for lockdowns, shutdowns, lives ripped apart. So the 2020 election was a catalyst for what we're seeing now, which is Americans are going to stand up with one loud voice, and Pennsylvania certainly will in November, and we are going to have historic wins in November.
Thank you. Ms. Sands, turning to you, you have 30 seconds. Is it time for the GOP to move on and pass the 2020 election?
Well, I'll just refer you and your viewers. First of all, Dinesh D'Souza's new movie just came out, or it's just dropping, and it's about this deal of 2020. Also, Senator Rand Paul said the election of 2020 was stolen by the Zuckbucks, Mark Zuckerberg and his family and his friends, changing the outcome of the election by private money controlling our election. We have to ban it. I'll ban it in Washington. On day one, I'll work to do that for all of you. But also, Mehmet Oz says that he's always been a conservative. I will just share with you. I just tweeted out, my team, as we walked in, his statements, and he is not a conservative.
We need to move on. Mr.
now you're
McCormick,
speaking
moving
out
to you.
both sides of your mouth.
Should the GOP move on from the 2020 election? You have 30 seconds.
Well, when you take the oath to protect this country, the thing you're protecting is our right to vote. And we have a tragedy here that most Republican voters in Pennsylvania don't believe in the integrity of the election. And there's all sorts of reasons to worry about it, with the extension of the mail-in ballot and the lack of security of the ballot boxes, the lack of oversight of precincts, and then we do have the money that's come in from Zuckerberg, and we have the fact that the Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed. So we've got to fix this. We've got to fix this at the state level. We've got to fix this now. We've got to have a governor that signs the right legislation. And the most important thing, voter ID. We got to have voter ID.
Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Oz. Have you discussed the 2020 election with former President Trump, and do you think it's time for the party to move on? You have 30 seconds, sir.
I have discussed it with President Trump, and we cannot move on. As all the other candidates up here have outlined, under the cover of COVID, there were draconian changes made to our voting laws by Democratic leadership, and they have blocked appropriate reviews of some of those decisions. We have to be serious about what happened in 2020, and we won't be able to address that until we can really look under the hood.
Okay, Ms. Barnett, we're going to turn to you. 30 seconds. Is it time for the GOP to move past that 2020 election?
Absolutely not. There's nothing more important than making sure that my one vote matters. And we see that elections have consequences. And I thought it was very interesting that Carla Sands is going to delineate how the election was not above par and yet try to throw me under the bus for what I had no control over. We ran
20
an
points.
amazing race in 2020. But yes, elections have consequences, and we must understand what happened, and we must hold people accountable. Not just understand, but we need to hold people accountable for what they did.
Thank you.
I'd
Lisa.
like to respond.
All right,
I'd like to respond.
15-second response,
Yes.
and then we're moving on.
So as I stated before, Kathy played the same card 2 years ago.
And what
She's
card
playing
was
now.
that? And what card
she
was
lost
that?
by 20
What card
points.
was that
And she has to
exactly?
take a hard
What
look in
card
the
was
mirror
that
because
exactly?
she did not,
So
they
you're
did
just
not
talking
steal
out the
the
Ms.
side of your
election by
mouth.
20
Ms. Barnett,
points.
I'm going to ask that you refrain from speaking when Ms. Sands is speaking. 15 seconds for your rebuttal. We are then going to be moving on to another topic. We have to try to get in as
But
many
she
topics
called
as
my
possible.
name and she made a salacious comment
We
towards me,
will
so
get
I
a
will
chance-
be asking
you
for
will
a
get a chance
rebuttal.
to respond. Ms. Sands
Thank
first,
you.
15 seconds.
Yes, as I said before, the election of 2020 was not stolen by 20 points. Ms. Barnett lost to a weak Democrat. John Fetterman is a strong Democrat. I will beat John Fetterman in the fall. I have the foreign policy experience, the defense policy experience.
Thank you,
and-
Ms. Sands.
And the trade policy experience,
And
and I will
Donald
beat
Trump.
him.
Ms. Donald
Ms.
Trump
Barnett, now I
is
want to
my
just take
15
a moment. I
seconds.
want to take a moment, though, to remind you of the rules. If you are talking over each other, no one at home can hear you. We are doing
It's
this
a
for the
Democrat
voters.
trick.
Just remember that we are doing this for the voters. If you are speaking over each other, no one can hear. 15-second rebuttal, Ms. Barnett, then we are moving on to the next topic.
Yes. Again, we ran an amazing race, and this is just talking out of both sides of your mouth. Do you have a crystal ball? How do you know how many votes were whether through legal fraud, whether through outright fraud, or whether through any other
Thank you,
issues?
Ms. Barnett.
don't know
Turning
that. You're
on
just
to
talking
another
out the side of
topic,
your
we are
neck.
moving on to the pandemic and COVID. First question going to Ms. Sands. The pandemic has raged for 2 years and has impacted every segment of our society and our economy, as we all know. Hopefully, God willing, we will never have to go through anything like that again. But if we do, what have we learned over the past 2 years that would specifically shape your policy priorities for the next pandemic? We begin with you, Ms. Sands, in 60 seconds.
Thank you. First of all, during the pandemic, I was serving as the U.S. ambassador in Denmark, and my team and I watched what was happening in here at home. We were shocked at how Democrats who are left-leaning and mayors who are left-leaning treated their citizens, the lockdowns. They took their talking points, their efforts, from the Chinese Communist Party, who controls the World Health Organization. It's shocking how draconian these rules were and how much they hurt our seniors who were locked away, our businesses that were destroyed, and our children who lost education and lost their freedom. We know that the pandemic came from China, from Wuhan, and the Chinese Communist Party shut down the flights from Wuhan to the rest of China, but they encouraged the flights from Wuhan to the rest of the world, and the World Health Organization encouraged the same thing. It is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Citizens must say no,
Thank you, Ms.
never
Sands.
again to mandates.
Thank
We are
you, Ms.
free
Sands.
citizens.
Turning to you, Mr. McCormick, you have 60 seconds. What specifically have you learned over the last 2 years that would shape your policy priorities in the event we have another pandemic?
Well, I think what we've learned is that the government overreach by dictating everything from vaccines to testing to mass protocols has wrought huge damage on our population, on our children, on our businesses, and those decisions best rest with individuals and businesses to make the right decisions for them. And so what we've learned is we need to be careful about not letting the government take too much responsibility and control. And this is where Mehmet Oz cracks me up, because I hear all his statements about COVID now, and this is a guy who on national television said the Chinese were doing a great job with COVID lockdown.
He did.
Who complimented Anthony Fauci as a great scientist and a great leader.
He did.
And who was the guy who was out there saying, mask up, mask, show love. And so we've had another flip-flop in the case of COVID by Mehmet, but it's a serious problem because we can't have the government intervening and taking too much control. We've got to let that responsibility rest with individuals.
And we are turning to Mr. Oz. Same question. What lessons have you learned over the past 2 years that would shape your policy priorities for the next pandemic? 60 seconds.
We witnessed a top-down, authoritarian, controlling response by a government that was unable to accomplish any of its major goals. Early on, for the first 6 weeks, there was abject panic everywhere. We had no tests. We didn't have leaders that we knew we could trust. Thank goodness President Trump was able to put together Operation Warp Speed. But Anthony Fauci, who was the leader of that initial response, should be fired. I've called for his removal. I would debate him. I've offered every means of calling out his failings. But he's representative of what we're witnessing now, which is middle-level bureaucrats making regulations and rules, even though they're unelected, that dramatically change our country. The three worst states in the country, to my knowledge, were New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York in terms of its response to COVID, and they were three of the strictest states. So the mandates didn't work, we now know that, but we've made Washington drunk with power, with the belief that they can actually micro-rule everything. And you're seeing the manifestations of that with our school systems, you're seeing it with energy policy, and you're seeing it at the border. All these examples of a top-down, authoritarian, ineffective rule.
Mr. Oz, 30-second follow-up. Have you changed your position on COVID from the beginning of the pandemic to now?
No. And I have it now, just to be completely open with everybody. How could you possibly think that I was not aggressively pushing back when I remember distinctly speaking on the Sean Hannity show about the fact we should not keep our schools closed, and the amount of hate mail and posts that came out that effectively tried to cancel me was reflected in that single endeavor. It happened countless times as I pushed back against orthodoxy. The right thing initially was to be cautious. Doctors are careful when they walk into the operating room until you get your bearings. But once you understand who your teammates really are, who you can count on, and how the patient's doing, you need to be cautious. And then after that, do what's right for the patient, always.
All right, thank you, Mr. Oz. Turning to Ms. Barnett, 60 seconds. What have you learned over the last 2 years that would define your policy priorities?
We need to walk as free people. We need to remember that that COVID does not trump the U.S. Constitution. Those are some very key lessons that we should have learned coming out of this. We should have also learned what kind of leadership we really need at this moment. We lived through 2 years that felt like literal hell jumped out on top of us, with Democrats putting their foot on our throats, putting their foot on our businesses, their foot on our economy, their foot on our children. We should have learned a very valuable lesson of what kind of leader we need at this moment. We need people who are going to be fighters. We don't need people who are globalists in the way that they have lived their lives and ran their business. And although I think you're a magnanimous individual, but you and your corporation, McCormick, you are a part of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, you, as well as you, Oz, they're both part of the World Economic Forum. This is a very serious organization that has a mindset of pushing globalism and ESG, environmental social governance.
Okay, thank you.
And we need to be mindful of that.
Thank you, Ms. Barnett. 15-second quick response, sir. Mr. McCormick.
Well, listen, I've run 2 businesses, wildly successful businesses. I'm not going to apologize for my success. I have done business around the world. It makes me uniquely capable of understanding the global world that we live in. I've served in the military. I've served in combat. So I know how to deal with the challenges we face.
All right.
And just like President Trump, that experience is going to make me a better senator.
But that didn't have anything to do with the World Economic Forum.
Thank you. Let's continue on with Mr. Bartos. Let him have a turn to speak here. What specifically have you learned over the past 2 years?
A critical question, because I want every viewer to hear this. During the pandemic, while we were shut down, while our schools were shut, while our businesses were shut, while our communities were ripped apart, Dave and his family were living, they were hunkered down, I think the magazine said, in Aspen, Colorado, which is lovely, but they were not in Pennsylvania. Dave was running a company where he instituted, as the CEO, mask mandates. Mehmet was living in New Jersey. I had my sleeves rolled up on main streets across all 67 counties, raising money with a great group. I was leading the effort, but we had lots of volunteers, raising money and helping over 1,000 small business owners on Main Street, mom and pops, keep the doors open when our government, and this is the key takeaway, Our government continued to put career politicians and people who live at the highest levels of the elite, they continued to put policies in place that favored the giant companies over small mom and pops. And what I heard from the 600 plus business owners I had the privilege to talk to during the pandemic, they don't want a darn thing from the government except a level playing field. Who are we as a society if all that's left when this dust finally clears are giant corporations? That is not Pennsylvania, and that is not the kind of senator I'll be.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bartos. Dennis.
Moving on to immigration and Title 42, which allows the federal government to prevent people from entering the country during health emergencies like a pandemic. It was set to expire May 23rd, but just tonight, before we took the stage, a federal judge granted a temporary restraining order to keep Title 42 in place until another court hearing. Javier Becerra, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary, recently addressed his concern about extending Title 42. Listen to this, please.
You use migration laws to deal with migration challenge. You can't use the cover of health to try to deal with migration challenge.
Mr. McCormick, we're going to begin with you. Do you agree with the judge who is keeping Title 42 in place and keeping migrants outside the country, or is that managing a migration issue with a public health order? You have 60 seconds.
I believe that it was a right decision to keep Title 42 in place, and it's a disaster on our border. I went to our border 6 weeks ago to see what the open border policies of Joe Biden have done. They have created a huge flow across our borders. It's creating and adding to the fentanyl crisis in Pennsylvania. It's contributing to the crime in our sanctuary cities like Philadelphia. It's putting huge burden on our social services. We've got to secure the border. We've got to finish the wall. We've got to end catch and release. And this is an area that our U.S. Senator has to fight on. And this is an area also where Mehmet's compromised. And he's compromised because he's an owner of a company that hired 1,000 illegal immigrants and was fined in 2017, agreed to the fact that they had consciously hired illegal immigrants, and that $95 million fine is the highest in the history of ICE. He's a shareholder. His family gets $2 to $10 million a year from that company.
Mr. Oz, your turn. Do you support tonight's ruling, or are we managing a migration issue with a public health order? You have 60 seconds.
I support the ruling. We have a city, Philadelphia, which just lifted its mask mandate after putting it on 4 days ago. Universities all over the country are putting masks back on, locking down. My son was in medical school, similar situation, telling me firsthand how the kids don't want it, but they're forced. So if we're going to force our children, and now in Los Angeles, as you know, there's a mandate for all transportation, so people aren't even following the CDC rules. Why would we drop the obligation for immigrants who are coming into this country as part of a cartel-run human trafficking operation that's basically subsidized by the weak rules of the Biden administration, and they're running narcotics across at the same time. 100,000 Americans died last year from narcotic overdose. That's 4 times more than died of COVID under the age of 50. And when it comes to David McCormick and his progressively desperate efforts to undermine me, you're picking on my wife's grandfather's company, where I have no management role at all. However, you did have a management role while Bartos and I and many others were struggling to deal with COVID here, building the largest foreign hedge fund ever in China, which so much so that President Trump on his teletown hall on Friday said that there are some weak people, pro-China people, who would let China
Mr.
eat
Oz.
our lunch.
Thank you. Ms. Barnett, a federal judge not letting Title 42 expire on May 23rd. Is that appropriate, or should public health orders be controlling migration? You have 60 seconds.
It is appropriate, yes it is. You cannot have a state of national emergency for the nation, but not have a national emergency as it relates to COVID at the border. But that is, it's in line with a lot of other illogical things that the Biden administration and Democrats have forced upon American people. Right now, we are on track of having over 4 million unlawfully present people come into our nation. There is nothing racist. There is nothing dispassionate about wanting to know who's coming into our country, where are they going, how are they going to take care of themselves. That just makes plain sense. It's not just the fentanyl, but it's the human trafficking and the human suffering that is also coming into our country. We need to secure our border by a variety of measures. We need to enforce the Remain in Mexico, enforce the first safe nation. People should not be allowed to shop for asylum. And lastly, we need to take a strong look at the USCIS. We have 1.5 million people trying to get into the country legally, and they're being barred of doing so.
Thank you. Mr. Bartos, 60 seconds to you. The pandemic is keeping undocumented immigrants on the other side of the border. Is that an appropriate way to deal with the issue? You have 60 seconds.
The judge is correct, and even Democrats running for re-election are running away from the Biden administration on this issue. That tells you how bad the Biden administration is on Title 42 and on the border. The border is an unmitigated disaster. While these candidates fight with each other, I'm running to fight for Main Street, Pennsylvania. And the sons and daughters of Main Street, Pennsylvania are dying by the hundreds because of fentanyl that's crossing our southern border. We have a southern border that's porous. Criminals are crossing the border, fentanyl's crossing the border, and Main Street Pennsylvanians across all 67 counties are suffering and dying. We need a strong border. We need to build the wall. We need to enforce the policies that worked under the Trump administration, whether it's Remain in Mexico, Title 42, and other policies. And we need to fight for good-paying jobs, safe and secure communities, and parental choice, and for all empowering parents and students across all 67 counties. Saving Main Street, Pennsylvania means those three issues. It starts, in many cases, with a secure border.
Thank you. Turning to Ms. Sands, was the judge correct in extending Title 42? And what do you say to critics who insist that that's managing migration through a public health order? You have 60 seconds.
You know, we need to secure our border and build the wall. Everything President Trump put in place worked. We had the most secure border in my lifetime during the last year of his presidency. In the Senate and in the House, we're going to put those policies back in place. We're going to need an America First president to really get it done in 2024. But the fact is, we do have the biggest influx of illegal immigration, and I will just call it an invasion into our country. They're estimating if we don't keep this in place, 20% of the people living in our country will be illegal by the end of the Biden administration. That's a disaster. They're giving them cash cards, housing, transportation, phones, and benefits that American citizens don't get. We have to secure our border. We have to build the wall. And I will just say, Mehmet Oz, he actually praised the Chinese Communist Party's response to the pandemic, and Dave McCormick could never have made the billions he did without bowing to the Chinese Communist Party. You do not make billions in China without bowing to the Chinese communists.
Thank you. We have a quick follow-up. Ukrainian refugees are crossing into the U.S. along the southern border. Forbes magazine estimates that more than 3,000 Ukrainian citizens were processed in March. That's a 12-fold increase from February. Should we treat Ukrainian refugees differently than other undocumented immigrants? Mr. McCormick, 30 seconds.
We should treat Ukrainian refugees differently, but we should take care that not to expand that envelope into a broader program. And the most important thing is we need to support the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. We need to give them all the lethal aid they need. We need to tighten up the sanctions. This has been a calamity, and it's because of the weakness of Joe Biden in Afghanistan and our energy policy.
Mr. Oz, we're going to give you 30 seconds. Should Ukrainian refugees be treated differently than other undocumented immigrants?
No, Ukrainian refugees should be coming directly to America, not through the southern border where it's a lawless environment that is profiting for cartels. Again, we have to drain the swamp, not just in Washington, but at the border. People are making a lot of money off of the weak response of the Joe Biden administration. And Ukrainian refugees may be Ukrainian, maybe not. Who knows who they are? And we should be directly allowing them to come. And there are communities here in Pennsylvania where there are large Ukrainian populations who are inviting these people in, and the U.S. government is not getting out of their way. They're not in any way helping these poor folks to immigrate here legally.
Thank you. Our time is drawing near. We want to move on to another topic.
We
Lisa.
want to quickly get to another topic. Only 30 seconds for these responses, though. Beginning with you, Mr. Oz. The question has to do with transgender athletes competing in women's sports. Earlier this year, UPenn swimmer Leah Thomas won the 500 freestyle swim at the NCAA Women's Championships. Before transitioning, Leah competed with the UPenn men's team in 2019. There was outrage coming out of the victory of Leah Thomas by female swimmers who thought it was unfair. Would you vote in favor of legislation that would prevent trans women from competing in women's sports? Mr. Oz, 30 seconds.
Yes. Biologic men, don't let liberals control the language. Biologic men should not be playing women's sports. I feel so strongly about that, I actually put it in my ad. And I believe across the board, we're missing the point here. Leah Thomas went to my alma mater, Penn. Penn said nothing to protect those poor young women who got up at 6 in the morning, practiced their whole lives to protect their rights. The NCAA cowardly said nothing. It was the parents of these poor girls who love their daughters more than anything in the world who stood up and said, enough's enough, you're hurting our children. What happened to Title IX support of female athletes?
Thank you, Ms. Barnett. 30 seconds. Would you vote in favor of legislation that would ban trans women from competing in women's sports? 30 seconds.
Absolutely. Biology matters. Biology is a reality. You know, and I mean, I find it to be unjust. I find it to be misogynist. You cannot compete and get all the benefits of being a man all your life and then suddenly decide one day you want to be a woman. I find it to be incredibly unjust. Not only do we need to have laws that protect those who find themselves outside of the norm of what society may consider the norm, but we also must look at legislation that protects
Thank you.
our young
Mr.
boys and girls
Bartos,
as
same
well.
question. Would you vote in favor of legislation that would prevent trans women from competing?
The failure, what we're seeing happen at Penn is, again, another example of the failure we see of woke CEOs, woke corporations, woke institutions. The NCAA failed those swimmers, period. The NCAA failed. The highly paid executives at the NCAA failed. We have fought for 6 decades to get our girls onto a level playing field for athletics, and we want to undo it all because there's no courage from these leaders. I would support legislation to ban it, but we can't keep looking to the government for that. This falls on the people who are
All
highly
right,
paid
thank
to
you,
have the
Ms.
courage
Sands.
to take
Your
care of it.
comments in favor of legislation that would prevent trans women from competing?
Yes, in a word, I actually wrote an op-ed opposing transgender athletes. Men cannot compete against women. It's not a level playing field. But I'm going to talk to the moms and grandmas for a second. I will protect your children's innocence in school. I will ban the indoctrination of children into critical race theory, where they teach our children to hate each other and hate their country. I
All
will
right,
work
thank you, Ms.
at the federal
McCormick.
level.
30 seconds.
Absolutely, I would support that legislation. Biological males should not be able to compete with females. But again, Mehmet, I'm sorry to keep bringing these things up, but you did an entire show on July 22nd, 2015, that was about 8, 7, 8, 9-year-old children, and you were supporting those conversations about transgender transitions, surgical things, treatments that would be irreversible. So I think we could all agree that that's absolutely
Time
inappropriate
is
in
up.
every
I
way.
wish we could
No,
continue
I'm sorry.
on. We've got
I'm sorry, that's a
10
little too much.
10
Yeah,
seconds
of
to
course.
respond.
So David
and we've got
McCormick
to
is
get
going to be my biographer.
No, I
He
tweeted
studied
it
my
out,
resume
too.
so carefully. I do television shows,
There's a lot
as I
to
should,
study.
about views that need to be expressed on network
All right,
television.
we have got to move on. Our producers are telling us got to get those closing statements in. Our debate is coming to an end. We're going to go in reverse polling order, beginning with Ms. Sands. 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'm running for the U.S. Senate here in Pennsylvania. I'm America First. I'm a pro-life, pro-First Amendment, pro-Second Amendment, constitutional conservative, America First businesswoman, Christian, and mom. I will never back down in fighting to make Pennsylvania a better place for our families. We've been going in the wrong direction for over 40 years. This is the time for a turnaround. I'm asking for you to support me on May 17th.
Mr. Bartos, 30 seconds.
I'm a kid from Reading who spent his entire life here in the Commonwealth. I love Pennsylvania with every fiber of my being. And as you watched here tonight, you got out-of-state candidates fighting with each other. To all the viewers at home, no, I will always fight for you and your families. I always have. I always will. I'd be honored to have your support on May 17th. Thank you so much.
And Ms. Barnett, 30 seconds.
Yes, I am you. I'm you. I have been traveling over 1,500 miles all across this Commonwealth, more than any other candidate here. When someone mentions a county, I see your faces, I hear your stories. I'm sitting across the table with you. I've been in million-dollar homes. I've been in some very humble homes. But these are very serious times. Our country is in trouble, and we need people who not only memorize our talking points, but people who have actually lived our talking points and who will fight for you and
Mr.
your
Ross,
family.
30 seconds. Mr. Ross.
About life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life starts at conception. Protect those little children from indoctrination when they're young. Make sure they're well educated and turn out into the workforce to build successful lives. Keep them safe from crime and protect the borders. Liberty is about the First Amendment and the Second Amendment to protect the First Amendment. And the pursuit of happiness for me is about capitalism, which is a beautiful way of living your life, and individualism. We don't want to be collectivists. That's what the Democrats are pushing for. As Republicans, we have to be exactly who we are, be free to do that, and be brave enough to act on it.
Mr. McCormick, 30 seconds.
Stakes are high, ladies and gentlemen. The country is headed in absolutely the wrong direction. I'm battle tested. I've served in our military. I've put America first. I've gone into combat. I've built businesses. I built businesses and created jobs in Pennsylvania. I'm an outsider, and I'll go fight for you because I am you. I grew up in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, on that main street Jeff Bartos is talking about. And the thing you can count on with me is I say what I believe, and I will do what I say. and I'd be honored to have your vote and privileged to be your senator. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. We would like to thank all of our candidates for participating in tonight's debate. And a reminder, Pennsylvania's primary election is May 17th.
And be sure to tune in on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. as the Republican gubernatorial candidates will debate. We thank you for joining us. We thank all the candidates, and have a great night.